Have you had the kind of plants that you try and you try and you try and you just don't gel with them? For some reason, they just do not like the care that you give them. You don't seem to enjoy them that much. Stick around with me, and in this video, I will tell you some of the plants that I don't think I'm going to be trying again. Hi, my name is Memo, this is my channel, Houseplantygoodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see some of it behind me, it's tropical houseplants. So today's video is probably going to be a bit of a negative one again, but I think having seen how the previous video in a similar kind of topic did, I think it's important for us all to vent, clear our consciousness and move on, and just discuss some of the plants that we really haven't gelled with too much. Now, big caveats with this one. I do not want to offend anybody. These are the plants that just didn't work for me. For myself, with the care that I give them, in my space, with the kind of conditions that come along with that. So it's not going to apply to everybody, but I do encourage all of you, this is a save space. Put the plants that you don't ever want to try again down below, and let's share it with everybody just so that we know that not everything is always rosy. So unsurprisingly with this video, I don't have most of the plants that I'm going to be talking about anymore. So I will be adding pictures somewhere around, or potentially videos if I can find them, just to kind of talk you through kind of what my experiences were, what maybe I did. So if you're struggling with them, if you maybe do something different, maybe you can kind of get them to work for you. I'm just at the point where I don't care anymore. I don't care enough to try to get them happy. So without further ado, and on that very positive note, let's dive into the first plant. So this is, I'm starting strong with the first one. It's a ficus, and I'll bring a picture here. It is the Ficus Audrey, and I think, is it Benengalensis? I will see if I can find the scientific name and add it somewhere. I have tried twice with this plant, and I'll give you some background as to kind of my experiences with this one. So one, I got it as a small plant, and maybe this is what I was doing wrong with this plant. Maybe I needed to get a bigger, more established plant. But one I got as a small plant. I'll maybe even find a picture that I have from like when I first got it, and this was like a property ago as well. This was during COVID. And if I'm not mistaken, I was growing that in semi-hydro. Now, what can I say about the Ficus Audrey? It's an interesting enough plant in terms of its foliage. People that have been here for a while probably know that I don't do too well with most ficuses, so, but I don't know if it's interesting enough for how underwhelmed I was with this plant. And again, I'm not going to give the caveat, but again, this is my experience and this is my opinions on this plant. We're not all going to agree with this one. I know there's a lot of people that love this plant, but it did nothing. I gave it bright light, I gave it bright indirect light, I gave it medium light, I gave it low light, I gave it all the different light levels, I gave it high humidity, I gave it regular household humidity. I kind of did it within a water reservoir, I did it without a water reservoir. And let me tell you what I noticed. I noticed a lot of root growth, And in the 2 years, I think that I owned that plant, I got maybe a leaf, and it was the smallest leaf in the world. Fast forward to the second plant that I got, which was, I think it was a rooted cutting rather than just a cutting. So it was a rooted cutting that I got a few years ago, again, probably a couple of years ago now, in one of the London plant swaps with a lovely individual. If you see this, I'm really sorry, the second one didn't make it either. To be fair, actually, neither one of those two plants died. That is something to be said. But I did give up on them, basically. I think the second one, because I knew that it had like more significant kind of emotional ties to the individual that I swapped with, and I think that individual had a much bigger plant. I think that one I ended up gifting to a friend. The first one just ended up in the compost bin because I just had enough of trying to do everything that I could with that plant and it doing nothing. If you want a plant that's very similar, at least in my experience, to a fake plant, so it will look exactly the same as the day that you got it, get this plant. And I know, some people do manage to grow this really successfully. I am not one of those people, so this is a plant that I will never be trialing again. The second plant, and it's more of a type of plant, and I think I've mentioned this enough times that I'm sounding like a broken record, Peperomia. Most Peperomia. I think I've still got the Peperomia obtusifolia, and I think I've got the variegated form of that, and I think that might be maybe one more, but the interesting thing with Peperomia, so I'm trying to like word this in a way that makes sense. The interesting thing with Peperomia is that I don't struggle to grow them, but even the really interesting ones, I think the caparatas and the ones that have got corrugated leaves, even those ones, I lose interest really quickly. I think it's because I am very fortunate, again, I'm very, very fortunate to live in the space that I live and have a conservatory like I do, where for the level, and they're not particularly demanding plants, I'll give them that, but for the level of care that they still need, they're just underwhelming to me. I don't even know if it's underwhelmed. I think I'm just whelmed. It doesn't excite me. And in a space like this, where I just don't have the space, granted, part of the reason why I'm whelmed is because they just don't get particularly large. I mean, can you tell that I like to get plants to size up? I am realistically not going to get this level of impact from a Peperomia, and that's got nothing to do with the plant being bad. None of these plants that I'm mentioning in this video are bad. They're just not ones that I gel with. They're not ones that really speak to me, because I'm just like, you're interesting. And I think if I had a big terrarium and I needed some filler plants, possibly Peperomias might be interesting plants. The reason why I haven't had them in any of my terrariums is because I usually have either amphibians or reptiles in them, and Peperomias are so fragile that everything would snap just from the pure weight of some of these animals, critters in these terrariums. So I've never really done that. But if I ever do get a terrarium that is just for plants, I'll probably have some Peperomias in it. They would serve a purpose there of kind of filler plants. But yeah, it's just not for me. And it's interesting, if you've ever had anything like hanging baskets like outside your house, and I do that every spring. I've done the winter ones this year and I'm really enjoying those. But I think there's a saying there where you need a thriller, a filler, and a spiller. So you need something that's a thriller, so that's usually quite an impressive plant. You need a filler, something that's just a bit there just to fill the space, and then a spiller is something that will trail down just to keep it a bit more interesting. Peperomias, for me, are forever just going to be fillers, really. But again, just my opinion. And an interesting one. So this is an Alocasia. The Alocasia, and again, I keep saying this, but I think most of these plants on this list, they do have big fan bases. This one I know has got a very large fan base, which is the Alocasia Black Velvet. This is an interesting one for me. I didn't struggle to keep it happy. Maybe I did. It didn't grow particularly fast or large for me. It's the same kind of issues with the Peperomias. It's just a bit whelmed, maybe a bit underwhelmed for an Alocasia. And I know it's a dual Alocasia, and I know they don't get huge. And I know you can get them a bit bigger. I always had smaller versions of it. But I think even the name is a bit of it kind of brings in that underwhelmingness as well, because black, yes, it is a very, very black plant. It's a very dark plant, and I would say out of a lot of the plants that have got the word black in them, the Alocasia Black Velvet generally reads black, to my eyes at least, rather than just a deep, deep, deep green, which is essentially what it is. But we've talked about this. I'm not going to prattle on about that in this video. But the velvet, if you've ever felt an Alocasia Black Velvet, please tell me that I'm not the only one and I'm not going mad here, but that does not feel like what velvet tastes. Feels like, not tastes like. I don't. do not eat your alocasias. Do not eat your alocasias. I do not endorse this message. No, 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 no. But it is one of those things that, yeah, it's just not velvety. It's not velvety. I'm not a huge fan of velvet plants generally, but if I'm buying something with the word velvet in the name, I expect a bit of velvetiness. It's this weird texture, if you've never felt it, it's this weird texture where it's very, very bumpy, but it is leathery. It's kind of like it's a thick, succulent leaf that's kind of got bumps on it, and it's matte. That's the only way I can describe it. It's matte. It's not shiny. It's not a shiny leaf, basically. But yeah, it's just not velvet. It's just not velvet, and it doesn't grow particularly large. I didn't struggle with it too much. Ironically enough, I generally don't do that well with dual alocasias, or is it dual alocasias? Yeah, dual alocasias. But this one I did better than some of the rest of them. It's just such a shame that for me it just bored me to death. It just really wasn't interesting, and I like my dark plants. This one to me just wasn't it. And the next one really pains me. Again, it's a group of plants that are classed in a specific way, terrestrial orchids. Now, no. I will quantify this because I have enjoyed growing the maculata one, I think. I'll find the name and put it at the top there. The one that has leaves that look a bit like lightning, and there's loads of different variants of that. But it is one of those plants that even in this space, I think it would still do better in a terrarium. And the Alocasia discolor, I think, the one that you can find a lot more easily, bores me to death. And I have never killed so many plants so quickly. It's just, it doesn't do very much. When it does do something, it's really underwhelming. And it just, I don't know. I know it's the one that everybody says, you know what, go with the Alocasia discolor because you'll get used to growing terrestrial orchids and then move over to the rest of them. And I've always tried with the Alocasia discolor just more for my own stubbornness and just kind of go, I will grow this. I will get it to enjoy growing in my space. I've never really done it, and it might just be because from day one I look at that plant and just go, you bore me. You really do. You're not interesting enough for me. You're not interesting enough for me to even keep trying. I think Macodes petola. Is it Macodes petola? I can't remember now. The lightning-y one. That one was fun. It does really need a terrarium. I'm trying to remember, there's somebody on Instagram, and if I can find them, I'll add them as well. I haven't seen a post from him for a very long time, but he's got kind of a large, varied orchid collection, and he also has some like very, very, very large kind of philodendron, kind of aroid specimens in his collection, and he's got the lightning kind of type of terrestrial orchid to go quite large, wide, not tall obviously, because they don't get massively tall. That one, drool worthy, but yeah, for me, it's not the effort that's needed to keep those plants happy, at least in my experience, wasn't worth it for what they are, really. And I know it sounds horrible because, as I said, I do like the one with the lightning, and it is very pretty in that respect. It's giving Dieffenbachia reflectory vibes. It's very, very cool. Very, very cool. On those kind of like lightning-y kind of veinations on the leaves. Very, very cool. But the Alocasia discolor, yawn. Like I cannot, cannot be dealing with it. So for me, it's a no. This might surprise you, mainly because I've got a plant that, if I'm not mistaken, is from the same family of plants. I think it's a Gesneriad. So let me show you what I've got, which I'm really, really enjoying growing an Epischia. And if I'm not mistaken, it is a Gesneriad. And thanks to everybody who mentioned what this might be in my previous video, one of my previous videos recently, it's doing well. It's doing really well. So I'm enjoying growing this. But this, maybe less so, at least so far in my experience with this one, versus the African violets. African violets are going to be the ones that are just not for me. Let me put this back. For me, the African violets just didn't really do it. I quite like the idea of those leaves that are slightly fuzzy. You know, I'm a sucker for some fuzzy leaves. The blooms are okay. They're nothing to write home about. I only ever owned kind of more the miniature type ones, whilst I think maybe if I'd got a bigger specimen, there are ones that are not miniature ones, maybe I would have enjoyed it a bit more, but it gives me kind of nursing home vibes. I get it, and it's a plant that has been very popular for many, many years, which I find interesting because I don't think it's the most straightforward. Like a lot of the plants, if you think about the golden pothos, the sansevierias, the monsteras, they're generally quite difficult to kill if you don't know what you're doing, which is the average person. And those are the ones that have been here for decades and survived. Somehow, African violets somehow, at least in the UK, fit within that category. And I'm just like, they are not the simplest of plants. So I don't know whether or not they survived because there's the bragging rights of I've managed to make African violets survive or not. But yeah, the flowers are nothing to write home about. In my experience with the small one that I had, if it had even a drop of water on the leaves, it would almost entirely melt, which is less than ideal, and you need to do a lot of bottom watering, and I used to do a lot more bottom watering back then. But I like to top water my plants now. It just makes it a bit faster. Bottom watering. Can you imagine the sheer level of like vessels with water I'd have to have in here to bottom water all of this? And no, hard pass. But yeah, African violets just don't do it for me. Like they need a bit of extra coddling. And for the extra coddling that I need to do with that plant, it just isn't. It's not interesting enough, and it just feels a bit geriatric. I don't know. I know there's possibly some interesting ones, and as I said, I'm hoping this doesn't trigger too many people, but yeah, just not for me. I am enjoying growing the Epischia, but again, I think because the African violet, it leans so much, realistically, the plant itself is a bit dull. It leans on that flower, and that flower is not enough to carry what, in my opinion, is a very boring looking plant. It's not enough. That flower is boring in itself, and it's a boring looking plant for me. The Epischia, at least, it's a bit more of a foliage plant, and the foliage, the one that I've got at least, and I'm enjoying growing, has a bit more interest. It's got that silveriness. It's a bit more interesting, so I kind of get that. So I don't hate all Gesneriads. I don't gel with the African violets. Oh, and the next one really pains me because I've tried to grow some of these in many different formats, and I would love to grow these. I'll see if I've got some pictures of my own before they turned into mush. Selaginellas, I think that's what they're called. Oh, stunning plants. Really interesting as well. There is something very moss-like, very kind of fern-like with these plants. Beautiful plants. I have tried growing it in relatively high humidity household conditions, did not like it. I have tried growing it in here with substantial humidity levels, didn't like it. So I'm just like, you know what, it's maybe a terrarium plant. Let's try it in a terrarium, kind of a bit more sheltered from like the critters that I said that I've had in all these things, and they didn't destroy it anyway. It still rotted to nothing. This is, as I said, Selaginellas are plants that I would love to grow. There are so many interesting forms of it, and I know it stays quite small, but it's just, there's something very otherworldly that I like about it. It's giving kind of Avatar and Pandora-esque. It's very cool. Cannot keep them alive. Cannot keep them alive. And I think Selaginellas are on this list not because I hated them, is because I can't deal with the heartbreak of trying to grow more of them and them turning into nothing in my care. It's so... There's always that one type of plant that really knocks your confidence back, and a lot of the plants that I've killed have never really knocked my confidence back. The Selaginella, I'm just like, why can't I get this to like me? What am I doing wrong? I do not know. So if you've ever, well, no, I need to not do this. No, forget it. I was going to say, if you know how to keep them happy, tell me down below, but I don't know if I can go through that heartbreak again of trying one more time to grow a Selaginella. And actually in the UK, some of them, they're not that cheap. So I'm just like, that's a very expensive experiment. Having seen that the results from previous similar experiments for me did not go well. So yeah, maybe don't tell me, maybe don't tell me. I will just close that box and say, you know what? I cannot keep that alive. And it's fine, I need to move on. But they are so pretty. The next plant is one that I do have twice in my collection, none of which are easy to pick up, but hopefully I'll be able to take a picture and put it here, which is Amydriums, specifically Amydrium Medium, and I think I've got the silvery blue one. So I've voiced my opinions on Amydriums before. I've never grown the full green one. I don't think I would want to try, and I'll explain why in this section. I do not want to grow the variegated one. It seriously looks sick, in my opinion. It looks like it's got all the diseases. So, but I know that one grows like a weed, which is hysterical. I think it's the only plant that I know that the variegated form of it grows better than the all green form, which is hysterical. But, which is a shame that it looks sick, because if it looked cool, variegated, and didn't look quite so sick, then I'd probably grow that absolutely no problem. So Amydriums are definitely shingling plants, one. I've grown them on I've grown them on cork boards as a bit of a shingling plant, basically. They are very slow. I've still got them in my collection, they're still going okay. I'm still watering them. They're not a difficult plant as long as you get them happy. I've got them in semi-hydro, in a coarse semi-hydro mix from Soil Ninja. They seem to be okay with that. They seem to be okay with the cork board. But I have had both of those plants for nearly 4 years now. I've got 3 or 4 leaves. Occasionally they'll get a new one. Occasionally that might have an issue, so it will knock the leaf back. And it's just a bit like, I just don't want to do it anymore. It's a shame because the plant in itself, the look of the leaves, the texture of the leaves, the coloration of the leaves is absolutely stunning. I think that if the Amydrium Medium grew as easily as, say, Monstera deliciosa or a simple and easy philodendron, and grew fast and grew to a decent size without too much faff, without needing boards, without needing all these things, do I think that would be one of those quintessential plants that everybody would want to have? Truthfully, yes. I do think so. It's an interesting enough plant that, to me, it's much more interesting than the Rhaphidophora tetrasperma, which a lot of people call the mini Monstera, even though it's not a Monstera, but it's got that kind of vibe of Monstera leaves, but just smaller with some of those splits. The Amydrium Medium, for me, is, hands down, much more interesting than the Rhaphidophora tetrasperma. I'm talking about the green one, not the variegated form. But because of its slowness, because of how specific it needs to be, and because of all of these things, it's just a hard pass for me at this point. I've tried for years now. It's just not worth it. I was kind of trying it on the point of, maybe if I keep it going for long enough, I might fall in love with it, or maybe if it just has enough roots, all of a sudden it's just going to become explosive growth. None of these things happened. It's a no from me. Again, the next one is one that I do have in my collection. It's behind me there. Again, not an easy plant for me to pick up and show, but I will put a picture here. It's growing happily, by the way. And it is the Philodendron Brandtianum, or the Philodendron Brandti, I think some people call it. And I know a lot of people are off this plant, and they have been for years now, and I'm probably one of the last few people that are still growing it. And I get it, because it doesn't particularly size up. I think Sydney Plant Guy was talking about his, at least he did a reel recently, that at least I saw a reel recently that he was, it's a silvery plant. Are there better philodendrons that are silvery plants? Yes. Are there ones that get bigger? Yes. Are there ones that grow faster? Yes. it isn't one, essentially it's like a silvery Philodendron scandens. You can get slightly larger leaves, and I have got slightly larger leaves on occasion. But again, this is another one that's not underwhelming necessarily. I'm just whelmed, and I don't have time to be whelmed in my collection and keep watering things. So I think that one remaining bastion of a Philodendron Brandtianum in my collection is probably going to bite the dust soon, because I'm just like, one less thing for me to water, and it then frees up space for something else, yeah? At the moment, I think the only reason why it's survived is literally the only plant that survives behind the Esmeraldense leaves, because you can barely see anything behind it. It means it doesn't get that much light. It gets whatever tiny amount of light it gets from back there, and it seems to be happy. Has it got mealybugs recently? Yes, and I'm just like, oh no, I know the mealybugs is not its fault, it's probably my fault, but at the same time I'm just like, you know what, it's one straw too far of me kind of going, I don't want to deal with your mealybugs, and I also do not want you passing mealybugs to everything else that you're potentially touching. You're out. You know there was going to be a Cissus on this one. Cissus, discolor, bicolor, I can't remember now, I think it's discolor. Stunning, stunning, stunning plant. Oh, I'm a huge fan of really intricate begonias, and I think this one is sometimes called the Begonia Rex Vine. It's not a begonia, it's a cissus, it's part of the grape family. Stunning plant. Usually these days, where you can actually find it a bit easier, it's sold on these massive like moss poles. I'd be curious, have you ever bought one of these on these massive moss poles? They're not cheap, but they're a lot cheaper than what they were 5-6 years ago. Have you been able to keep yours alive? Because I killed mine so quickly, and a lot of other people that I know killed theirs so quickly. I could never, ever propagate that easily, and I know other people found it exceptionally easy. This might be one that just me struggled with. But a lot of people that, at least that I spoke to, that got this plant, always killed it, invariably. And it's a shame. It was also a pest magnet in terms of mealybugs. There's so many nooks and crannies, and I'm just like, you know what? You are pretty, but for me, it's one that, if you can grow it in your collection, that's absolutely amazing. Do I think this is one that maybe needs to stay in nature and maybe not be a house plant for my own selfish reasons? Yes. I think if this is in its own habitat, as with most of these plants, they'll do a lot better than they are in our household collection. Are a lot of these other ones that I've still got going for a while now, in my humblest of opinions, more adaptable to be in kind of like as house plants? Yes. Do I think that this specific Cissus is maybe a bit too specific about what it needs and it's difficult to replicate? I also think yes. I've got other Cissus that I think are much more amenable to being a houseplant, and they're absolutely fantastic. But for me, it's a shame. It's such a crying shame, because this is such a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful plant. But yeah, and I tried a couple of times with it. It's a hard pass for me. I again cannot deal with the heartbreak of trying to grow something like that, and it just doesn't do well. And I'll finish off on a philodendron, and this is a philodendron that I had a while back. I think I grew it for a couple of years, and it is the Philodendron tortum, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, the Philodendron tortum, and it's the one, hopefully I've got an image. I'm dubious on whether or not I had an image of my own plant, because it gave me issues from day one, which basically meant that I'm just like, I don't want to see you, let alone take a picture of you. No. So it's the philodendron that kind of looks like it's got got loads and loads of splits on its leaves. It's giving Monstera vibes, and it's giving vibes of the Monstera. Oh, I'm trying to remember now what it's called. Oh, it's eluding me at the moment. I've got the Monstera that I'm thinking of up there behind the camera. That one, if you're between the two, and a lot of times people are between the Philodendron tortum or that Monstera, which one is it? Give me a sec. After a quick phone check, Monstera subpinnata. Monstera subpinnata versus the Philodendron tortum. Go for the subpinnata every single time. I know for a lot of people the subpinnata isn't that easy to grow, at least in my experience. I gave it a moss pole. It was exceptionally happy. Very, very, very chunky soil media. I let it pretty much fully dry out and then water it when it's fully dry. Absolutely fine. Not an issue for me at all. The Philodendron tortum, it takes forever to bring out a new leaf. If you've got even the whiff of, regardless, thrips, mealybugs, spider mites, it doesn't matter what type of pests, it might entirely abort that leaf that you've been waiting for months. And if it doesn't, it will come out looking so mangled that it's just like you're such an eyesore, and it just doesn't grow very fast. It's probably because it doesn't have that much leaf in order to photosynthesize, but the Monstera subpinnata doesn't either. And that one does grow a lot faster, a lot more consistently, at least in my experience. So for me, the Philodendron tortum, just not worth it. Just not worth it. And it's a wide plant as well. And I'm just like, you are so underwhelming, difficult, and just slow that, you know what, you cannot have that much space in my space where other things could be growing much better, much nicer, much more kind of consistently than you are. The tortum is a hard pass. It's one of these plants that if somebody gave it to me for free, I would give it back to them. And if I don't need to be rude to that person, and hopefully not being rude, I might give it to somebody else, but it would come with a lot of caveats, just kind of going, know this and see if you're comfortable with it. But I would not keep that plant, never. Oh no, those are very kind of negative thoughts, but I felt this good. I felt, can you understand? I felt that was cathartic for me to bitch and moan essentially about the plants that I just really not enjoyed growing for different reasons essentially, or those plants that just don't work for me. I'd be very curious to see if some of yours are similar. I would assume they're probably not. You're probably going to have your own set of different plants. The other thing I will say, please, if you're all putting it in the comments down below, be nice to each other. Again, none of this is personal. It just means that that person who is trying to grow that plant, it just wasn't for them. It's fine. We are all allowed to like and dislike different things. We're not all the same people. It'd be so boring if we all liked and disliked the same things. So yeah. Let us all know down below and let's have that conversation. This is usually a really fun topic to kind of discuss amongst ourselves. But hopefully you've enjoyed. Hopefully I shall see you here soon. And I truly, truly hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks. Bye.